Okay, so first question, just out of curiosity, what got you interested in writing comics?
Um, well, I didn't actually originally think I was going to be writing a comic. I was just writing, thinking I was going to maybe write a story or a screenplay or something, and I it was just wasn't really working for me, and I found European comics. I'd never seen them before, and I thought these are so great. Maybe I could turn what I was doing into a comic. I grew up reading comics, but it was just really just the drive to tell my own story. I don't really have any interest in writing anyone else's comics. Just my own. Just sort of a happenstance of necessity, really.
Like European comics, which ones? Because like I'm mostly just familiar with like Image Comics and obviously Marvel and DC and Dark Horse Comics.
Like they have these things, these albums, these hardcover albums, they're called bande dessinée, and they're about 50-page kind of stories. Some of them over multiple books, some of them just it's a one and done. There's a whole bunch of titles like Undertaker, Prophet, the Inkle. Uh, I've been reading history ones. I read one on Gilgamesh. There's one I want to get on the Roman Empire. It's not really kind of what you would be familiar with American superhero stuff. It's more like what I imagine manga is like, where it's just you can get a little bit of everything. And yeah, I discovered them about 10 years ago, never knew that they existed, and I've been kind of obsessed with them ever since. The only problem is I can't get too many because they are kind of expensive, especially to get them over here in Australia.
Okay, yeah, the closest thing I have to reading European would probably be like DC Vertigo because they had a bunch of British writers coming in
Yeah,
trying to do their own thing. Yeah, I love
yeah,
DC Vertigo back in the day.
uh-huh. Yeah, and that's sort of what I was more interested in as I got older. I started out, with it like a lot of kids did, 11 years old, reading Spider-Man, X-Men, Spawn, that sort of stuff. But as I got older, yeah, I started reading more back issues from the 80s, and they were a little bit different, and I liked the tone of them. And then that's what sort of led me to more that stuff, like Vertigo stuff. And that's kind of more what I'm interested in now is less superhero sort of stuff and more kind of European inspired stuff.
Yeah, I can never get away from the superhero stuff. I always grew up on that, always loved that. But
Hmm.
yeah, considering the current state of comics, especially with wokeness and I think like Alan Moore even talked about how much of a hellhole it is working for the comic book industry, although in my opinion he's pretty woke. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing
uh,
about the woke stuff is it just doesn't go with superhero at all.
yeah,
It's like that's like oil and water. You can't mix those two things together. Their ideologies just are incompatible. So, when they tried to wedge that in there, they just ended up making the worst decisions you could ever imagine at the worst time, at a time when it was becoming increasingly difficult to convince, you know, kids to get into comics. They made them unpalatable for everyone, including all the existing audience. So it was just like a perfect storm of bad decisions in the industry.
yeah, some of those characters, what was it? It was like a superhero team, Safe Space and Snowflake or something like that. I forgot the names. It was a one and done for me. Just
Yeah, that went viral. That was at the time when at that point no one could ignore it anymore. And normal people who weren't really paying attention saw that and they were like, this can't even be real. But of course, anyone who'd been paying attention knows no, this was just the trajectory. This is where it was always going to be headed. And I think they just actually released that finally the
really.
other day. Yeah, so you can actually read pages and it's as hilariously awful as everyone imagined it would be. But I don't think they published it. I think they just released it as a digital or something. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I doubt they're gonna make much money off of that.
No, no, I think they were just like, well, we did it, so we may as well put it out there. I don't know.
Yeah, like most comic books nowadays, I've just been completely avoiding. I did the only one I'm kind of familiar with is what they're doing to Spider-Man. Um, I remember they did that one storyline not that long ago where Ben Riley was back as Spider-Man and he got into a fight with Miles Morales. I decided to read that just because it sounded like an interesting concept. But like straight away, it was just painfully cringy. Like the dialogue was terrible. I don't know why, but Anne May was for some reason the strong independent feminist. I did not understand where this guy was going with that.
I gave up on Spider-Man originally way back in the day in the 90s. And that was just because I didn't like the how sort of fast and loose they were playing with fundamental aspects of that character. And also they were trying to force, at the time I was a kid, a teenager, trying to force me to buy, 30 different titles just to keep up with the story. And I was just, that just can't happen. I can't afford that. So I sort of dipped out. So there's a whole bunch of Spider-Man history that I've kind of missed. And, I started talking a little bit more about comics for YouTube and stuff. And, you hear things going on, you see stuff. I see Spider-Man's, he's young again, living in his girlfriend's apartment, acting all weird. And then, I started checking into it more closely. And then there was a story about him and in some alternative dream world where Mary Jane had these kids, and I was like, I don't know what the hell was going on. And none of it looked interesting. None of it even remotely resembled what I remember reading when I was a kid. Even, and I've read a lot. I've read back all the way back to the 60s. I've read a lot from the 70s. I've read a ton from the 80s, and then, about half of the 90s I read. So I think I know the character pretty well, but I did not recognize anything from this new stuff.
I think like one of the problems might be the constant changing of writers, since they're always trying to continue from the last story, but like sometimes they just want to like completely retcon it and just completely retcon everybody's
Yeah, well,
character.
but they always had different writers. I think more than anything, they used to have a kind of a captain, steering the ship. Someone who knows the canon, knows what you can do and what you can't do. And, to keep the consistency, that was, even when I didn't even think about it when I was reading it back in the early 90s when I started reading it, but it was baked into every book, every story that, Spider-Man was a Peter Parker was a guy, Spider-Man was a character that went all the way back to the first issue. And that was his story. The timeline didn't really work perfectly, but it didn't need to. It just, worked close enough, well enough. He'd by the time I got into it, he'd already had the black suit, lost the black suit. He'd, Venom was a thing, and now he was meeting Carnage. And this is all a story that went back. He'd had some of these villains going back years and big formative events, and it was like one thread through many different writers. That's all gone now, and that's why I can't get into any of these stories because nothing matters. They can just say, oh well, that never happened now, or and then that's not a story. And that's just like a, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't work. And I've sort of become really against that. That sort of just canon doesn't matter. You can retcon anyone. Anyone can die and come back at any time for any reason. I'm not into that at all, and that's why I really don't read any of their stuff at all anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they did have a few hidden gems. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Superior Spider-Man, but roughly like I
Not
think it was
familiar with it. I've heard of, I've heard things here and there, but I'm just, yeah,
it was
I'm just
a
not that interested anymore.
It was a story they introduced about 12 years ago where Doc Ock became Spider-Man by switching bodies with him.
Hmm.
It sounded like a dumb idea at the time, but the story was actually pretty good, and it ends with Doc Ock sacrificing himself to give Peter his body back. And then they kind of did this other story where he somehow came back. Don't think about it, but he put his mind into a clone of Peter Parker. And they did another Superior Spider-Man run where he's just doing his own thing now. And they were actually doing pretty well with the story. It was actually pretty
Hmm.
entertaining. But like last in the very last issue, he sells his soul to the devil and becomes Doc Ock again and becomes a villain again, completely undoing this really good series. That just pissed off a lot of people.
I remember reading about that. I remember reading about how that, yeah, annoyed a lot of people. So I'm familiar with that, but I don't really know too much about it because I didn't read it.
Yeah, I would recommend it, but that ending is just gonna piss everybody off. It's surprisingly pretty decent. I was surprised that I was actually enjoying the story, you know,
Uh,
because I was expecting them to screw it up, and I was sort of right. At the end, they did.
yeah, see, that's like Game of Thrones. I can't recommend anyone to watch Game of Thrones because I hate the ending so much.
Yeah,
But
we were
when it was good, it was great. That's so hey, watch up to this point or read up to this point and then stop and just leave it at that.
we actually had another Game of Thrones situation with the Umbrella Academy on Netflix.
Yeah, see that one I couldn't really get into. I don't know. I wasn't really feeling that one. I never read Umbrella Academy, so I didn't really. I was
Okay.
just seeing it on Netflix for the first time.
I never read the comics either. I watched the show initially because of Robert Sheehan, and I loved him in Misfits.
Hmm.
Yeah, but in my opinion, I did enjoy the show. It did have a few cringe moments, and I'm not a big fan of Ellen Page or Elliot Page, whatever you want to call her. But yeah, the last season, everybody's hating on that one. It's the exact same situation as Game of Thrones. 6 episodes, try to rush everything,
Yeah,
and
wrap it
everybody
up.
dies.
Oh, goody. Yeah, it's amazing that they do that. It's so expensive and time consuming and all the effort everyone puts into a television show, and then they just decide, you know what, we want to do something else now, so let's just wrap this up.
Yeah, it's
And
funny.
it can ruin everything. Because you can go back and watch series. I'm watching Star Trek Next Generation right now. Um, and it's great. And I know that it doesn't just all get ruined at the end. And that's God, that started in the mid or late 80s. And it's still watchable to this day, but I'm not going to go back and watch Game of Thrones because I know how it ends.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about Umbrella Academy is that it's exactly like a modern comic book, because literally everybody dies and the timeline gets
Hmm,
reset, which means everything that happened in the entire series never happens.
I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm becoming a bit more of a purist because I think that like a lot of writers today completely misunderstand what a story is and what readers want, especially comic book readers, and they don't respect the medium, they don't
Mhm.
respect the history, and because they think it's all silly, it's all just Camp Batman, Biff, Pow, Zap, and nothing matters, and it just doesn't make for compelling stories. You go back and you listen to Stan Lee and Kirby and Ditko and all those guys. They knew they were writing for 11-year-olds, but they were taking it seriously, even if they were, pumping stuff out as fast as they could. It wasn't like super high literature or anything, but they at least took it seriously. That this was like a business, and they were trying to write stories that would sell. And I just feel like they've become ego projects for these writers who want to make a name for themselves or something. I don't know what's going on specifically, but yeah, it's good. I always feel great when someone comes along. I've heard great things about Mark Miller. Somehow I don't know if I've read a single Mark Miller book, but people rave about him. Um, but I like hearing that. Like, oh, he's really good, great. Uh, um, you know, Comics needs more really good writers in it who actually understand and care about the medium.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar, but I can't think of anything he wrote.
He wrote Kick-Ass. I think he wrote
Oh,
uh, Kingsman. It's a ton of other ones that people do rave about. He's very successful. His books do really well, and I think they often kind of try and option them for TV shows and stuff like that. I don't know how many have been made, but obviously Kick-Ass the movie got made.
enjoy those movies. Although they did pretty well with
Mm,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, like some other writers for me that I can think of that I usually enjoy, but lately I haven't been that into, like Grant Morrison, for example. I liked what he
Hmm.
did with Doom Patrol back in the day, but I grabbed this graphic novel I saw in my local library. It was a Superman story he did. It was pretty recent. I assumed it was old, but it was actually pretty recent, and I had no idea what the fuck was going on. I did not get a sense of humor at all. I honestly can't tell you what the plot was. I just I was
That's
just
always
bored.
good. Yeah, that's
Basically,
always.
Superman had to recruit Manchester Black and some other people to help him with some kind of crisis, and I have no idea what that crisis was, but he apparently helped.
I was never into DC comics ever. You always some of their most popular heroes are, some of the most famous in the world, obviously. But I don't know, in the early 90s when I got into it, they just didn't look appealing to me compared to the Marvel universe, which is just colorful and crazy. And so, I really don't know much about Superman and Batman beyond what I've seen in movies and stuff.
Mm.
So, I know as much as sort of your everyday man on the street, but um, I didn't. I think the only Superman comic I've ever read was The Death of Superman, which everyone read,
Oh yeah.
and which I liked. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, for what it was. I've read a few Batmans, and they were fine, but yeah, I just never really that just never, I don't know, hit for me, which annoys a lot of people, but oh well, it is what it is.
I grew up with both, so I love them both. What I do
Yeah.
find kind of funny is that at one point in both businesses, they had a phase where they had to like try this other brand where they both had to be like really edgy. DC
Hmm.
succeeded, Marvel kind of did. Marvel did the Ultimate Universe, and the
Hmm.
only one everybody liked was Ultimate Spider-Man. But
Yeah.
they eventually killed him off and introduced Miles Morales. I was never a Miles Morales fan. I just never liked that character.
I don't mind him. I think a lot of people don't. I think what a lot of people don't like about him is that he's sort of surreptitiously the replacement for Spider-Man, if needed. He's like the backup Spider-Man, which yeah, like that doesn't sit right with me. And I've heard a lot of theories as to how he came about. They were worried about potential copyright lawsuits and all that sort of stuff that were taking place. Um, but again, I didn't even I didn't even read them. So all I know of Miles Morales is the movie. Um, and that I like that fine enough. That was okay.
Yeah, I actually enjoy the first movie. The second one I hated.
Yeah, I
Um,
didn't watch that second one because everyone was telling me don't waste your time, which was a bummer because I really like the kind of crazy animation they did on that first one.
the animation's still great, but it's the
Mhm.
best thing about that movie. The plot itself, I was not a big fan of. It was nothing but build up. It actually reminds me of a funny story. My friend and I went to this comic book shop called Comic City, and we kind of got to know the cashier there, a guy named Hunter. And I mentioned to both of them that I just hated that movie, and Hunter was kind of trying to like disagree with me on that, kind of like debating me on it. I was telling him I did not like it. It was boring. It was nothing but build up, nothing but exposition. It had no climax. And I wanted to talk to this other guy I met there, and it wasn't until after we left, my friend told me that Hunter whispered to him and asked him if I was racist for not liking that movie.
That's a sign of the times, isn't it?
It's like the only thing you can see about Miles Morales is his black. That's all you
Mm.
really got. He really is just
Half
Spider.
black too.
Oh yeah, half black, but that's just means all black to most people, let's be honest.
That's true. They usually choose that side to identify with. Notice that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, look, I mean that's just a sign of the times, isn't it? That's just
yeah,
I would love to be able to go back to, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s when you would get laughed at for saying something like that. But everything is that's how everyone sees everything now. Not everyone, but too many people. Yeah, you could spend an hour talking about why you didn't like something, and all anyone hears is, "Oh, you just." I did a short on that got 2 million views, where I just listed off all of these super famous black actors that have been beloved or were beloved. Some of them fell out of favor for different reasons, but were beloved for decades. Some of the biggest actors and actresses in the world, and it was never an issue for decades. But now in the 20 teens up to now, all of a sudden, everyone decided that what they just don't like black. Like it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. That's just a I don't know what they're doing, like gaslighting or I don't know, obfuscation. That I know you just don't like someone because you're a racist. All right, sure, buddy.
I mean, it kind of annoyed me because like that was right after I said I loved the first movie. Yeah,
Yeah. Was it you weren't racist back then? You
yeah. So
became
like,
racist in the room.
yeah, just you gotta like all the movies or else you're racist. Like, is that the definition of racist? Like somebody who just doesn't like a movie?
Well, it only works only if you're not black and there's someone who's black in the movie. That's the caveat.
The black privilege.
If
You
you
go,
don't
you're
if you don't like a movie with a main character that's white, that's definitely not racism,
you can
regardless
hate
of
white people.
yeah.
It's okay.
Though it's encouraged.
Yeah, like
They
it reminds me.
celebrate it.
It reminds me of that the picture even Elon Musk posted of like all the gingers that got race swapped in movies and
Yeah, and
shows.
there's a new one they just did. Um, Add to the list. I can't remember. It's I can see her face, but they just they just race swapped a new ginger. That's crazy. And there's hundreds of examples of it over the last decade, and people make the big um meme of all of them. And then everyone will say, well, it's not happening. There's a meme. Like there's hundreds of examples. And you're telling me this isn't happening? There's something going on there. Don't know what it is, but anti-gingites out there.
Yeah, I called it the ginger genocide.
Hmm.
There was this new Superman show, My Adventures of Superman, and I told my brother about it. He didn't see anything, didn't see a clip or a picture or a trailer. But the moment I told him that, the first thing he asked me was, "Did they make Jimmy Olsen black?" And then I said, "Yeah, did you see a trailer?" And then he said, "No, I didn't see anything." And I asked him, "Wait, how'd you know he was black?" And then he said, "Because it's ginger." He was
It's
like,
crazy. I mean, it's like a rule now. It's like a law of Hollywood.
I thought it was hilarious. Like, it's so common. That's the first thing he thought of when he heard new Superman show. He immediately thought the
I think
ginger.
it's on independent creators to continue bringing out stories with red-headed characters just to keep them alive. Otherwise, this is going to disappear from all media.
Yeah, the Rippaverse is doing a ginger female.
Oh, I've got one. My main character is redheaded as well. I mean, not because of this. It just happened that way.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, when it comes to creating stories, I think the characters just they're just how you picture them. It doesn't have to be that deep.
yeah. Well, my one was easier. I had a dream, and I was like, all right, that's it was kind of a profound thing at the time. So I was like, okay, that's the character then, and then that was it. So yeah, definitely didn't have anything to do with racial politics of the 20 late 20 teens.
Yeah, because like I like to write too. I haven't written fiction in forever because I've been working on my op-eds.
Hmm.
I'd love to get back on that though. Every time I think of a protagonist or a character, I usually just base them off of people I just know because that's what I think just fits the
Yeah,
story. You know, I don't try to like overthink it. It's just here's a person, here's what's happening to them, here's how they react.
yeah, I definitely have done that in the past as well, where yeah, there's a character who kind of comes into the story, and I just see them in my head either as someone that I've known or sort of an amalgam of a couple of people that I've known. Um, and that's just who they are. And I can't change that. That's who I see in my head. So I'm a bit the same that way.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of writer are you? Are you more like a architect or a gardener?
Definitely an architect. Yeah, I like to plan. Well, it's actually now that I say that, I plan out everything meticulously to the point where I feel like it can function on its own. So, I build this world, I give it rules, I have a timeline to writing, say, a scene. I'll have everything in place. I'll sort of go for a walk or something, and I'll just watch it in my head unfurl like I'm not participating. Obviously, I am, but I try to watch it like I am just a sort of a voyeur watching from above. And that seems to really work for me. So in that sense, yeah, maybe I'm an architect who makes a garden in his building. And just so that's sort of, you know, where the spontaneity can come into it. But to me, that's the most fun part of the whole creation is that moment of like, okay, everything's been laid out. Let's see what happens. I know why the scene is there. I know its purpose. I know that it needs to lead into the next scene. But exactly how that gets there, I'll see. And that's the fun part of it. That really you kind of sound like a crazy person to anyone who hasn't written fiction before when you describe it like that. But to people who have written fiction, a lot of writers understand that feeling that your characters kind of have a life of their own and just almost autonomous beings. And I feel like that having that approach to it, a lot of people have said to me they really felt like the characters that I made have felt um, pretty real. So that's a compliment.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm the same way. Yeah, just like when going on walks, I just think of the story, just let it play out again. To me, it feels like when I was a little kid and playing pretend with my friends. And
Hmm.
nobody really thought of a story. They just kind of acted it out, and everybody just played on the next scene.
Yeah. Yeah, because you do want that spontaneity. They called it the muse back in the day or whatever. You want that spark. You don't quite know where it comes from. Because you can't really plan things out too well. So again, it's more just about setting up the rules of the world and the kind of timeline of events and everything, and just seeing how it all plays out.
Yeah, I remember when I got really into Harlan Ellison, and I remember that video of him just sitting at a bookstore, and they were giving like these titles, and he would just like write a story based off that title.
Mm.
Yeah, I was so jealous of that. Like he just sees the title and is like, already he's already got something going. I wish I could write that much.
I started writing, it was, everything I wrote was awful, terrible. Just like if you, so I imagine, yeah, there are people who would just have been doing it for so long and know so much about it and so easy with it, they could just slam it out like crazy. And I understand that you good to be jealous of that. That's normal. I never had writer's block, but I never had to, I never had to write for other people. Everything I've written has been for myself. So, if I ever did have to write for other people, maybe I would get it. I'm not sure, but I don't have time for that at the moment, so I won't be finding out anytime soon.